In a bid to strengthen extractive industry, NNPC becomes EITI partner company, and the federal government introduces gas transport network code. Plus, global stocks mixed as Trump shows support for Oracle bid to buy TikTok in the U.S. This is Business Express reaching you on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority, the NTA. We are reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. I am Amina Nujaim, and welcome to the program. The Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, NNPC, has become an extractive industry transparent initiative partner company, joining a group of over 65 extractive companies. A statement by Dr. Kani Obateru, Group General Manager, Group Public Affairs Division, Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, says the new status would require that NNPC publicly declare support for EITI principles and by promoting transparency throughout the extractive industry, help public debate and provide opportunities for sustainable development. He also says the new status will deepen commitment to accountability, transparency, engage in rigorous procurement processes, including due diligence in respect to partners and vendors. Zainab Ahmed, Nigeria's Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, former EITI board member, also stressed the importance of ensuring that national resources wealth contributes to sustainable development. Mele Kiari, Group Managing Director, NNPC, affirmed his company's commitment to the EITI, reiterating that becoming an EITI supporting company aligns with NNPC's cooperative vision and principles of transparency, accountability, and performance excellence. The Speaker, House of Representatives, Femi Gbajabiamila, has made a case for Africa parliaments to urgently join local and global efforts to push for the cancellation of the external debt owed by various countries on the continent. The Speaker made the call during an online meeting with speakers of some Africa parliaments on debt cancellation for the continent from multilateral and bilateral partners.
Furthermore, is the need for us to reflect on, one, the processes that led to Africa's heavy indebtedness in the first place. Two, the role parliamentarians can play to address this going forward. And three, what assurances we as parliamentarians can give our borrowers that if our debt is cancelled, the freed up resources will be invested in social and economic development of our citizens.
Let's push forward and let's campaign to get debt cancellation for African nations.
All donors are very much interested in accountability issues related to money they release.
Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning Zainab Ahmed gives MDA's August 28 as deadline for budget estimates, as the federal government is to spend the sum of 12.658 trillion in 2021. According to the budget call circular, the 12.657 trillion naira is to be financed by a revenue estimate of 7.49 trillion naira, leaving a deficit of 5.160 trillion. Non-debt recurrent expenditure is expected to take 5.746 trillion naira and a capital budget of 3.086 trillion naira. MDA's capital expenditure is allocated the sum of 1.485 trillion naira and 674.11 billion naira for multilateral and bilateral projects-tied loans. Similarly, 234.19 billion naira has been allotted to the capital supplement. 337.06 billion for grants and donor-funded projects. 335.59 billion for government-owned enterprises and 24 special intervention projects. Debt service has been allocated 3.124 trillion. Out of this, domestic debt is allocated 2.183 trillion, while foreign debt is expected to take 904 billion naira and a sinking fund of 220 billion provisioned to retire maturing loans. Now, the sum of 481.41 billion naira is provided for statutory transfers and another 420 billion allocated to the Special Intervention Program, SIP. And as government plans to prioritize next year's budget on works, housing, power and transport, among others, some Nigerians are of the view that education, health and agriculture should come tops as well as reduce cost of governance.
When we talk about budget, the first area of focus should be education. How much was allotted to education before we talk about works, which takes care of infrastructures? It is only when people are learned, they should be able to construct good roads. If not, we continue to rely on foreign companies to come and do ordinary things Nigerians are supposed to do. So we should talk about, first of all, how much is budgeted for our education, how much is budgeted for our health. Then agriculture, because these are three key things that when they are put in place, if Nigerians are learned the way we think we should be learned, a fellow Nigerian can come up today and say 1 kilometer road that is supposed to take maybe 100 and something million, that he, with his own kind of invention, he can do it for 20 million.
The electricity, that's power, good roads, and then there should be transparency in the employment pattern, or rather, not that somebody will come and meet you that I have a slot, come and buy a job.
Expecting to see more job vacancies for those that are not working. I have 2 brothers that have graduated, but not yet working.
I'm an entrepreneur. I don't depend on government. I work out my things all alone. But if at all they are going to do it accurately, I believe and I pray, let the people that are going to hand everything on manage it very well.
Nigeria may not get it right until a time when we are able to reduce our cost of governance. The cost of governance is extremely too high. How much in this present budget of 12.6 billion is going trillion is going for governance?
Now that Vox Pop brings us to our discussion for the day, which is on the 2021 budget estimate. Our guest is economist Tope Fasua. Welcome to Business Express.
Good afternoon.
Now, looking at that views of people, looking at towards the 2021 budget, government seems to want to look at works and housing and transport and power. Are you thinking the same way?
Apparently, I mean, well, the truth is that those have always been our problem. We need a lot in terms of infrastructure, especially power, things like roads, you know, even water and all of that. Any responsible government will focus on those things, especially now that resources are tight. Anything that can make the lives of the average Nigerian better and a bit easier is what government must spend on, given the very tight resources. You can see that the government will have to borrow almost 5 trillion of that budget. This year we're borrowing over 4 trillion for 2020. And of course, you could see, of course, that creates a debt problem. People have been complaining about debt crisis, but I always say that this is a time for government to borrow because, in fact, almost every government in the world, including the ones that seem to be doing well, in fact, I'd say every country in the world is borrowing. If you're not borrowing externally, you'll be borrowing, raising local bonds to tide over these very terrible periods where businesses have shut down, as a result of COVID and all of that. So yes, I would align with that position. But I also noticed that in the same budget, the government is proposing not to take on any new projects.
Yeah, exactly.
So they want to ensure that they are able to complete projects. We've always had so many projects that are hanging in Nigeria. It'll be great to see some of them completed than, to open different kind of new white elephant projects.
Okay, now looking at some of the prevailing situations in the economy, do you see the proposed budget as realistic considering present circumstances?
I think it is realistic, really. I've always been an advocate of a much larger budget because when you look at Nigeria's budget per capita, it's really small per capita. Compared with budgets of other countries in the world, including African countries like South Africa, like Algeria, like Angola, like Egypt, even down to Kenya. If we look at the budget vis-a-vis per person, budget is really small, especially if we say that we're the giants of Africa. So I've always been an advocate of a larger budget. Now 12.6 trillion sounds ambitious, but again, when you discount it or convert it to dollar, you realize that it's even smaller than maybe last year's budget, as the case may be when the rates were higher. And a lot of that budget is going to be denominated in dollars anyway, because a lot of the inputs will still have to be imported, and all of that. So it's not too bad. Government should think very deeply about some of these things. Now, it's not easy running a country. Oftentimes, when people make comments, they sort of trivialize the art and science of running a country. If I was this, I would do that, it's not easy. However, I believe that when we have 5, 6, 7, 10 people brainstorming over an issue, and if they were honest to themselves, they will come up with solutions. And so the issue is, how do we fund this budget? But you can see already that government is taking a few initiatives to find funding. I may not agree with all of them, but they're trying. Yeah.
I'm coming here, talking about initiatives. What factors do you see driving the budget?
Well, okay, factors. Well, okay, exactly. Now, so the bottom line is, how do you fund the budget? That's the driver. Of course, there's also the aspect of, okay, how do you raise the funding to get the budget going? I recall the issues that the Minister of Finance is having with those gentlemen in the House of Reps presently. So there's an aspect of the budget that will be funded by project financing. That's there. There'll be an aspect of the budget that will be funded by direct borrowing from World Bank, IMF, and all of those people, cash money. And then there'll be an aspect that will be funded internally. Now, the real issue has always been for us the internal revenue. How do we grow the internal revenue? I see a few more initiatives. Like I said, I may not agree with all of them. There's been some huge drive in terms of stamp duty. There's 53 items that they're taking stamp duty on, and all of that. The FRS is trying to be more aggressive. And then even in this same budget, you could see some advices that have been given to MDAs in terms of the kind of things they want to see, exactly. The kind of things that government doesn't want to see in this new budget. They don't want to see you saying you want a certain brand of car. If you want a car, you want a car.
In other words, reducing the cost of governance.
So exactly, but however, I still think that the budget is still largely very traditional. When I talk about 6, 7, 10 people sitting in a place and brainstorming, we would want some very radical changes, turning things upside down, inside out. But it's still pretty much traditional. We have 3 trillion going into capital expenditure. About another 3.1 trillion going into debt servicing, about 5 trillion going into recurrent. So 335, that makes about 11. The remaining is statutory expenses and all those other things that are outside the purview of these three kind of expenses. So it's still a bit traditional. I would, because again, the civil service and the public service is a machine that you have to keep running. We've not been able to really extricate ourselves from that and say, okay, guys, how do you fund yourself so that we can actually budget for the people?
Okay, I'm going to take you back a little bit. Debt servicing.
Yeah.
How do you see that going?
Yeah, it's tough right now. As a matter of fact, the what they reported was that for the past, in 2020 so far, 97.5% of our revenue has been used to service debt, which is terrible. It's like everything we've collected in terms of revenue locally, we've used it to service it. Now, because the guys who lend you money don't want to hear stories, not even COVID stories, unfortunately. However, there's still a chink of opportunity for us to go to them and say, guys, you know, this is like a force majeure, it's an act of God.
But then there are certain conditions that are likely going to be considered whether or not they want to hear COVID stories. Are there conditions that are likely going to be adjusted?
Now, it depends on how aggressive we are. It depends on how quick we are to approach them for some of those concessions, and it depends on the wording of the agreements we have with them. But it's something we must explore one way or another, because we also need some debt forgiveness now. Otherwise, you know, many countries will default in the world if you don't actually do some debt forgiveness. So we're going to actually, of course, already we're asking for debt forgiveness. That's there, but because again, we cannot use all our revenues to continue to fund. In fact, what's going to likely happen now, because those debt obligations are already on ground and we also intend to take a bit more, chances are that we're now going to need all of our revenue plus extra in order to service the debts alone. Because again, now the way it works is that the debt servicing is on, the reason why it's that high now is because it's on queue, it's on schedule. All right, so whether you like it or not, the X amount of money you need to pay to these guys every month, and as the case may be, whether or not, because again, you could see that only about less than 10% of the you know, capital expenditure has been released for this year.
Right. Still talking about the COVID stories.
Yeah.
How does the budget include it? How does the budget address the impact of the COVID stories on the Nigerian economy?
You could see that one of the things that they've done is that there's a certain NESP, a certain Nigeria strategic plan, economic strategic plan, which is supposed to bridge the gap between the ERGP, Economic Recovery and Reconstruction Growth Plan, and we're transiting into a certain development plan proper. So there's this NESP that's in between, and one of the goals of the NESP is to ensure liquidity in the interim, despite the fact there's a COVID thing going on now, and to ensure that companies don't start collapsing everywhere, and that, you know, that every company doesn't throw their people out. So you can see, well, I'd say the government has been doing quite a bit in that regard. They've given out quite a bit of money in COVID loans. They want to even add to that. They still have things going on in places like NISAL. You know, they're giving out you know, the agriculture and SME loans. You know, there's quite a bit of initiatives, and in fact, I think recently the president announced another set of intervention. So we don't have a choice. Like I said, look, unfortunately, we have found ourselves in something close to a world war scenario. Okay. Only that the war came in through some, you know, the health part of you know, and it's that health issue versus the rest of the world. Now, but one of the things that happened is that countries begin to close their borders. You can see what's going on in Ghana, you know. So countries begin to close their borders, and everybody is on their own. And even the COVID vaccine we're talking about, a lot of the Western countries have made bookings for billions of doses. And, you know, most of Africa is still left on its own. We don't know where we're going to find the funding to do that. So what the government is doing actually is to ensure that the economy is running, and a lot of money has been spent, you know, doing that.
With all these complications and issues that are current in the current situation of the Nigerian economy, what would your closing thoughts be on Nigeria's debt profile?
Right. Yeah. Well, again, my closing thoughts is that, you know, we should brace up. We should brace up and understand that, look, this is the time for government to incur a few expenses and pay later. It's natural. We should also look at, we'll go back into history, World War I, World War II. As the case may be, we'll see the general structure of an economy. We'll understand economic history in that regard. We shouldn't panic, but every Nigerian must be ready to work a lot harder, a lot smarter, because all of our contribution is what increases the GDP. And I also want to encourage government, you know, like, look, They need to really think outside the box, all right? They need to challenge their thoughts. They need to understand that the real challenge before everybody, and in fact, before the government, is how to take the economy out of the traditional thinking into a new digital thinking.
Okay. Tokpe Fasua, an economist, thank you so much for your thoughts and for joining us on the program today. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much.
Business Express will take a short break and we'll be right back. On the capital market, it's a green day on the market this Wednesday as the NSE O-Share Index gained 0.14% to close at 25,171.32 basis points. Investors exchanged 180 million shares valued at 1.5 billion naira in 3,108 deals. Transactions in the shares of Zenith Bank, Access Bank and Transco led the activity chart for the day. The top price gainers were Guarantee, Interbrew and Superdress, while the losers were topped by CAP, PZ and Glasgow Smith. And on the global scene, European stocks advanced slightly on Wednesday morning, posting after a strong session stateside that saw the S&P 500 hit a fresh record high as China stocks led losses in Asia. Olainka Ojo has a summary of performance of markets across the globe.
Stocks in Asia Pacific closed mixed on Wednesday as the S&P 500 rose to a new record overnight. Japan's Nikkei traded higher by 0.26% to close at 23,110.61 basis points. The Shanghai Composite fell 1.24% to close at 3,408.13 basis points. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index also fell by 0.74% to close at 25,178.91. Meanwhile, European stock markets were slightly higher after record highs on Wall Street. German's DAX rose by 0.20% to 12,907.40, as London's FTSE 100 and CAC 40 of France also advanced. US stocks futures were marginally higher early Wednesday after the S&P 500 hit its highest level ever, wiping out all the losses from the coronavirus sell-off. To African markets, Africa's main stocks were mixed as South Africa's JSE Top 40 depreciated by 0.36%. Kenya Nairobi All-Share Index also fell by 0.68% to close at 130.51 basis points. Tunisia's Tunidex was also up 0.28% to close at 6,689.85 points. Namibia's overall index and Ghana's GSE Composite also depreciated at the end of Wednesday trading.
Now, the exchange rate remains high at the black market as dollar scarcity hits banks. The dollar is traded at 480 naira to a dollar Wednesday, with the lowest rate at 477, a 1.48% rise. It's traded at 473 at the beginning of August. Let's now see the exchange rate. And this is where we end this edition of Business Express. Don't forget you can access this and all previous episodes on YouTube, and you can also communicate with us on Twitter, and the handle is @NTA News. Now, don't forget the hashtag BigXP. Join us again Thursday at 9:30 a.m. for another package. Remember to follow the guidelines to protect yourself against COVID-19. I am Amina Nujem, and thank you for your time.